Hello and welcome to our webinar, the Cultural Investment Fund for this year. I'm Hannah Harris, I'm the CEO of Plymouth Culture, and today is an opportunity to hear a little bit more about the Cultural Investment Fund, what we've funded previously and what we're specifically looking for this year, particularly around the introduction of a theme. So just a little bit of background. We started the Cultural Investment Fund last year in 2020. This was very much in a response to the COVID-19 kind of crisis that we were experiencing as a sector. And for a few reasons, it was about trying to put funding into the sector. It was about trying to work more collaboratively. We were very aware that funding was having to change and that resources were becoming more scarce. So this was about collaborating as partners. And we really wanted to look at new ways of working differently and bringing different approaches into the sector and recognise that knowledge and innovation didn't just sit with the funded organisations, but sat with individuals and cultural organisations across the city. We were also very aware that a lot of the funding that was being made available was about survival. It was about emergency funding and micro commissions, which of course was very necessary at the time. But what we were seeing was a real lack of funds available for research and development, or available for planning and piloting, testing and exploring. And so this fund was very specifically about that and about giving people an opportunity to do the bit of work that often doesn't get funded, and that's the kind of exploration and development work. It's very much about strategic alignment. So we very much wanted to make sure that this investment fund aligned to the culture plan that was published earlier this year, and is a 10-year plan looking at our ambitions and objectives as a city. And so we are increasingly making connections between this fund and that work, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And this is a collaboration, I'm pleased to say, across all 10 NPO organisations in the city. We recognised, as a result of COVID, but other activity happening, that we knew the sector needed to change. We knew that the system, more broadly for society and the economy, is very broken, and COVID has highlighted that. And so things needed to be done differently, and we very much wanted to set an example and lead by example, and so decided that we would collaborate, that we would pool existing funds, and that we would work in a way that we as national portfolio organisations and funded organisations haven't really done so previously, but wanted to try and experiment with. Last year we funded 5 projects: Little Magical Experiments, Moths to a Flame, Now's Their Time, Spaces to Speak and Vacancy Atlas. All very different organisations, very different projects, but all presented something that they wanted to test. They had a question or they had a concept that they wanted to explore, and that they would go about doing that in many different ways. There are videos for each of these that you can find on our website, and we have a collective video that really talks about what the participants and organisations benefited from the funding, both personally and professionally. And I'd recommend you have a look at that to just get a real sense of some of the unexpected outcomes that they found, but also the real importance of the fact that the whole project allowed them to take what was an idea for them into a reality, and that might be testing things, and that might be proving things that they didn't expect, or disproving things, but it gave them that opportunity to really stop and reflect on what they were doing and pilot activity. So the objectives for the fund, which haven't changed from last year, are very much about seed funding initiatives that reimagine how we work as a sector and a city. So that's where the sort of innovation comes in. It might not be brand new work, but it might be different applications, it might be different approaches or different partnerships, and really trying to understand how we might develop as a city and a sector. We wanted to create a sustainable mechanism for cultural investment, so we're really pleased that this has been able to be supported again this year by the national portfolio organisations, and we hope that moving forward, even if the fund or the parameters of it change slightly, we will continue to work collectively as a group of organisations. We wanted to really support organisations and individuals to innovate out of crisis. And although we know it's a year on from when COVID-19 first arrived and we first went into lockdown, We are not out of this pandemic, and we recognise that there is still work to be done as we move into a post-COVID world. So we feel that that objective still holds true. And we really wanted to create an approach that would develop, amplify and adopt new ways of working. So for us, what's really critical about this fund is that we want to support projects, however small they may be, that have the possibility of creating outcomes or learning that can be shared. So we want this to be something that we will share and disseminate beyond the project so that others can adopt it, they can learn from it, they can be inspired by it, and they can embed it in the work that they're doing as well. And that's a really critical criteria for these funds and the projects that we will work with. Something that we have done differently this year is we've introduced a theme. And this year's theme is togetherness. This is very much driven, as I mentioned before, from the culture strategy. One of our core themes within the culture strategy is around inclusivity and diversity. And so we wanted to use the term togetherness because it's a broader way of looking at inclusivity and diversity. And what we're really interested in is that sense of belonging, how we might bring people, organisations and communities together. And we think as a result of COVID-19, as we move into that post-COVID world, now more than ever, we need to come together in communities and in partnerships to help address the inequalities that we've seen across the sector and society. And that sense of togetherness is about building a genuinely inclusive and diverse sector. So we're very interested in not just funding diversity training or more inclusion training, but looking at inclusivity and diversity in a different way, looking at how it become more embedded and how it can support the inequalities that we have seen magnified over the last year to 18 months. So that togetherness is really important as a theme. And also we're very keen that last year we had really interesting projects, but there was nothing kind of central holding them together. And we hope that this year what this will allow us to do, and for the projects that are funded, is to become a sort of cohort of peer-to-peer support and a sort of network within its own right, so that those funded projects can support one another as well, because they have a common theme across the initiatives. Strategic alignment, as I mentioned, is very critical, and the togetherness theme has been driven by the culture plan, which I would encourage you to have a look at and can be downloaded from the Plymouth Culture website. Our key drivers for the culture plan are community, environment and inclusive growth, which of course togetherness can sit within any or all of those. And we have a specific ambition statement. We have 5 ambition statements overall in the plan, and this specific one, we will embed equality at every level of the sector to actively support diversity of voice and celebrate the creativity in everyone, is what specifically drives that theme around togetherness and is a core ambition for us. So what we're looking to fund, of course, we couldn't possibly have an exhaustive list of the projects, and we're very keen to see different, diverse, interesting and unusual projects come through this fund. But what we wanted to just reiterate is this is a research and development fund. So we are interested in supporting the testing and development phase of initiatives that would lead to recommendations and, importantly, shared learning that we can disseminate to the sector. So that might look like research and development. It could be about pilot activity. It could be about research and test workshops, information gathering sessions. It could be about audience engagement and testing, building of prototypes, either physically or in a digital space. It could be about creating toolkits and frameworks specifically that can be shared. It might be about investigating ideas and concepts, or building and collaborating with partners, or perhaps beta versions of apps and digital platforms. As I say, this isn't an exhaustive list, but it gives you an indication of the types of things we want to fund, and in particular, the sort of phase of development that we're interested in with this project. What the support looks like that we can give. So we've hosted already a development workshop, which was by no means mandatory and was a sort of standalone support workshop as well. And that was for people to explore a sort of framework and method of developing project ideas, and in particular, understanding that kind of research and development aspect. We are hosting this webinar, which will be made available online for those who couldn't attend also, and gives people an opportunity to ask questions and share information and gain information. Once selected, so for the projects that we end up funding, you would be nominated a National Portfolio Lead for each project. What that does is it gives you contact with someone who can act as a sounding board, but also importantly can act as a broker for you. So part of the remit of that organisation is to help you make connections between other national portfolio organisations, but other people in the city, other projects in the city and beyond. So you will arrange on a one-to-one basis with them how frequently you want to meet or when you want to speak and how you want to do that. But they will definitely have a remit about supporting, being that critical friend for you and brokering connections for you. In the last funding round, we hosted also a series of kind of lunchtime talks and workshops for all of the projects to come together to hear from speakers, but also to share amongst each other. With the added theme this year of togetherness, we're hoping that that will become an even more important and beneficial part of the process. So throughout the life of the funding, we will offer a series of facilitated action learning sets. So this is a specific style of facilitation where you'll have an opportunity to build a sort of peer support system with the other projects where you can help problem solve amongst each other, and you can have a sort of gentle facilitation that puts you in that space and that method of helping and supporting each other. We encourage you to make sure that you make time and budget within your budget allocation to attend those sessions. We have made it clear kind of the commitment that we would expect from that, and we see it as a very important part of your project. So please, if you need to, make a budget allocation to be involved in those sessions. From a practical point of view, applications can be sent via written format, and there is a form on the website that you can complete to do that, or a 3-minute video if you would like to, as long as you also attach your budget information. We have the webinar which we've hosted and is recorded here. The call opened on the 19th of July and will close on the 6th of September. We anticipate making the funding announcements on the 4th of October. What we did last year, and we will do the same this year, is the NPO organisations read all of the applications, score them and shortlist them. We then pass that shortlist to an independent panel, which is made up of various individuals, and we will announce that before the closing date as well. And that panel meets to consider that shortlist and then to make their final selection. So that sits outside of the control of the national portfolio organisations. And what we make sure is obviously that we have a spread of organisations, a spread of budgetary commitments, art forms, and make sure that across the piece, all of those projects are able to contribute something collectively to a shared learning process. So we will make those announcements, and we will also make sure that we give feedback to those people shortlisted but not selected for funding, so that hopefully it is a useful process for you as well. We anticipate projects will conclude at the end of March 2022. This year we had to allow an extension, obviously for reasons of COVID that prevented certain things happening, particularly face-to-face activity. So we'll very much review and monitor on an individual case-by-case basis to see whether changes need to be made to timelines or deliverables and even the end date. And we'll work closely with people on that basis. And the maximum funding you can apply for is £10,000. There is no limit on the number of applications you submit, nor is there a limit on the number of applications you submit as a lead or that you are cited as a partner on. So you could submit your own application and also be a partner amongst one or a number of other applications. Obviously, we will make sure that we take that into account when we make our final selection to ensure that the money is being evenly distributed and not being sort of funneled into one or two organisations. But there's no limit on the number that you can apply for. I'm really pleased to say that the project this year and the fund is supported by all 10 national portfolio organisations, as well as support through Arts Council, which some of us are funded through, and will make money available to this project through that fund. I think what I want to really focus on is that the key thing for us, because it's a research and development fund, is not about your end point. It's not about your outcomes and your deliverables. We will speak to you about those, but that's not what we're buying here. What we're interested in is, what is your research question? So Little Magical Moments is a really good example of an organisation we funded last year. They're a theatre company for children and young people, and although they used theatre and performance to deliver their project, that wasn't what they asked to fund. That was the process by which they investigated a question, which was about, how do families and young people engage in the digital space as opposed to the physical space of performance? And so they held workshops, they held information gathering sessions, they did test pilots, some in person and some online. So their application was not, I would like to run a series of performances. Their application was, we'd like to explore the digital world for families and young children, and how people transition from a physical performance into a digital space and vice versa. So they used theatre to test that, but that wasn't what we were buying. We were not buying a series of performances from them or commissioning a series of performances. What we were doing was making funds available for them to answer that question for themselves and others, but through a series of performative activity and questions and workshops and consultation. So we just really like to emphasise that what we're looking for in project submissions is, what is your question? What are you exploring? What are you testing? What are you interrogating and investigating? Rather than, what are you delivering? Because this isn't it, we're not commissioning work here. It's not about commissioning artworks. For us, this is about, what are you trying to understand and how are you going to do that? So that's the thing we'd really like you to keep in mind when you're applying. The forms are all on our website. Information around the eligibility and what we're looking for in a bit more detail is also held on our website for you to have a look at, and have a look at our guidance before applying. We hope that this has been a useful webinar today. Any questions can be submitted to us. Any questions that we think are generic and that would be useful for others to know, we will add to our frequently answered questions section on the website. So please do keep referring to that. And as we get questions coming through, we will be updating that between now and the submission deadline. So we'll make sure any questions that have come out of today's webinar are also added to that space so that people have equal access to that information. If you need support in any way, you'd like to run some ideas past us, then that's absolutely fine. We can't obviously get involved in the detail of writing your application, nor can we say at this stage whether you will or won't be successful. But we're very happy to provide support and guidance and to help you understand the criteria for submission if that's helpful for your planning and development. I hope today has been useful, and we really look forward to receiving your applications, and we'll be excited to share with you the news of the funded projects once confirmed. Thank you.